Good morning, all. I am Dr. S. Prakash Babu, Assistant Professor and Clinical In Charge, Department of Emergency Medicine, PSMSR Kupam. I thank the organizers for giving me opportunity to interact with you all today. I am going to discuss about acute heart failure or acute pulmonary edema. Whatever I am going to discuss is only the emergency department management. I am not going into general management. Acute heart failure is one of the most common causes of hospitalization, especially in people aged more than 65 years. The prevalence is projected to increase. AHF affects predominantly the elderly. Males and females are almost equally affected, but females are older than males and they have preserved ejection fraction. CVD affects Indians at least a decade earlier than the Western population. 52% of cardiovascular diseases occur before 70 years of age. The burden of cardiovascular disease is gradually increasing. The reasons being better life expectancy or increased life expectancy with high proportion of older population, better treatment for myocardial infarction, lifestyle changes, westernization of the diet. So what is acute heart failure? Heart failure can be defined as the inability of the heart to pump enough blood to meet the metabolic demands in the body. Coming to acute heart failure, it can be either a new onset of symptoms or recurrence of already existing symptoms and signs of heart failure. Most importantly, it requires an urgent or emergent therapy and it results in an unscheduled care or hospitalization. So if heart failure symptoms are worsening, and the patient requires an unscheduled hospital visit or admission to the hospital, that is called acute heart failure. It causes at least 50% mortality by 5 years of age. One third die within an year of onset of symptoms. So what is the pathophysiology? How acute heart failure develops? There is an index event or a precipitating factor which can damage the heart muscle. The damage to the heart muscle results in disruption of the ability of the myocardium to generate force, or there is loss of function of the myocytes. They both combined can lead to a decline in pumping capacity of the heart. When there is a decline in pumping capacity of the heart, there are certain compensatory mechanisms. They come into play and they modulate the left ventricular function to regain the normal function of the heart. But what happens is sustained activation of neurohormonal and cytokine systems. This sustained activation leads to left ventricular remodeling in the form of hypertrophy and reducer contractility. When there is hypertrophy and reducer contractility, the blood supply needed for the heart to contract normally increases. If that cannot be supplied by the heart, there is a self-perpetuated cycle of damage and progressive reduction in the cardiac function. This becomes a vicious cycle. There is damage, neurohormonal activation, cardiac remodeling, and this becomes a vicious cycle setting up heart failure. So as I told earlier, there are some index events also called as precipitants which lead to worsening of the heart failure. Most important is non-adherence. A patient who is already a known patient of heart failure is taking excess salt or excess fluid intake contrary to the advice, or is not adherent to the medication which has been advised. Renal failure can worsen and it can act as an index event. Substance abuse like continued use of cocaine, methamphetamine and alcohol. Alcohol is one of the most common causes causing various diseases in the body including liver, kidney, heart. Poorly controlled hypertension, anemia, thyroid disorders, or excessive exercise can also lead to worsening of the heart failure. There are certain iatrogenic causes. Iatrogenic means that is induced by medical therapy. Recent addition of negative inotropic agents in a patient who is already with depressed cardiac function, like calcium channel blockers or beta blockers. Initiation of salt retaining drugs like NSAIDs, steroids or thiazolidinediones. Inappropriate therapy reduction or new dysrhythmic agents. All these events can lead to precipitation of heart failure. What are the causes of heart failure? There are causes intrinsic to the heart, causes extrinsic to the heart. The intrinsic causes include structural or valvular heart disease, a pre-existing heart failure, an acute coronary syndrome, myocarditis, cardiomyopathy and pericarditis, dysrhythmias. Extrinsic cardiac disease like pulmonary disease, COPD leading to heart failure, which is called the carpulmonale, and pulmonary embolism leading to acute heart failure, and long-standing systemic hypertension, which is one of the most common causes. You need to classify acute heart failure to be able to properly manage the heart failure. Most common variety of acute heart failure is the hypertensive acute heart failure. In hypertensive heart failure, there is preserved left ventricular ejection fraction and systolic blood pressure is greater than 140 millimeters of mercury, and there is features of pulmonary edema and symptom onset is less than 48 hours duration. Next is pulmonary edema. Again, pulmonary edema can be either hypotensive, normotensive or hypertensive. Pulmonary edema presents with respiratory distress, rales and chest auscultation. Another variety of cardiac failure is cardiogenic shock, wherein this hypotensive form of the cardiac failure, wherein your systolic BP is less than 90 millimeters of mercury with signs of impaired perfusion. Acute and chronic heart failure, SBP is 90 to 140 millimeters of mercury, and there is something called as high output failure, high cardiac output with tachycardia, warm extremities and pulmonary congestion. Right heart failure, wherein there is low output syndrome with jugular venous distension, hepatomegaly and may have hypotension. This is a normal form of congestive heart failure, but the term congestive heart failure is not being used anymore. So during pathophysiology, I told you about the compensatory mechanisms in the heart failure which bring back the depressed LV function. These are decreased cardiac output, diastolic dysfunction, myocyte injury, mitral regurgitation, ventricular interdependence, and tachycardia. The renal mechanisms like sodium and volume retention, acute kidney injury, and RAS activation, renin angiotensin, aldosterone system activation, endothelial dysfunction, increased arterial stiffness, vasoconstriction, afterload contractility mismatch, volume redistribution, capillary leakiness. Again, endoneurohumoral, RAS activation, sympathetic nervous system activation, oxidative stress, and inflammation. All of these will lead to congestion and organ dysfunction. So what are the clinical features or what are the symptoms that patient presents to you with? Most common symptom is dyspnea at rest or on minimal exertion. Almost 90% of patients present with dyspnea. Orthopnea and paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea are the specific symptoms which tell you a diagnosis of cardiac failure. Onset can be either acute or subacute, worsening over a period of time. Other symptoms are related to venous congestion due to failing heart, like pitting type of pedal edema, weight gain with abdominal distension, early satiety, decreased appetite, excessive fatigue. It doesn't only cause symptoms related to organ systems. It causes psychological symptoms like depression, altered mental status, and sleep disturbances. Clinical features. There are two sets of clinical features which tell you whether there is volume overload or there is hypoperfusion. The features of volume overload include raised JVP, hepatojugular reflex, tender hepatomegaly or splenomegaly, pitting type of peripheral edema, ascites, an S3 gallop when you auscultate the heart, and a loud P2, which indicates you that there is pulmonary hypertension. And in pulmonary edema, you can find pulmonary rales. Symptoms related to hypoperfusion include, as you all know, features of shock, cool extremities, pale dusky skin, narrow pulse pressure, tachycardia, and hypotension. So once you have examined the patient, you need to investigate. Most common and useful things are biomarkers. Out of them, BNP and NT-proBNP have proven beyond doubt. If they are elevated, there is some form of cardiac failure. But the negative predictive value is greater than the positive predictive value, meaning that they can effectively rule out, if they are within the normal limits, effectively rule out cardiac failure, but their increase has different levels and different diseases that can cause increase in BNP and NT-proBNP. False positives occur in myocardial infarction and pulmonary embolism. False negatives occur in obesity. BNP levels greater than 500 picograms per ml are diagnostic of cardiac failure. Other laboratory investigations include calculation of eGFR to look for concomitant renal failure, blood urea nitrogen calculation, which directly correlates with the level of neurohormonal activation. Other biomarkers like ST2, galactin-3 and GDF15 have been advocated, but they have no clinical benefit. They are still in the experimental stages. If the diagnosis is not clear, obtain other investigations like D-dimer to evaluate for pulmonary embolism, procalcitonin to evaluate for evidence of any infection. Imaging studies are the one which tell you whether there is pulmonary edema or not. You can do an ECG, echocardiography and chest X-ray. ECG shows changes suggestive of ischemia, infarction or dysrhythmias. Echocardiography gives you complete picture about the cardiac function. It assesses the global systolic and diastolic function, regional valve motion abnormalities. It can tell you valvular function or any valvular diseases, structural heart diseases, hemodynamics including estimates of filling pressures, cardiac output and also whether there is a pericardial disease or not. Chest X-ray, which is one of the most common investigations done in the ED. It confirms the diagnosis of pulmonary edema. It can identify cardiomegaly if present because of structural heart disease. So the picture here in the X-ray you can see pulmonary edema. This is a plain chest radiograph obtained in sitting position. You can see the lungs. You can make out the cardiac borders. Here there is no cardiomegaly, but what you see is this opacity expanding or going from the hilum of the lung and spreading to the peripheries, both sides bilaterally, and it almost appears equal. So this is a pattern typical of pulmonary edema. It's called bat wing pattern. Bedside USG is very useful in evaluating a patient with acute heart failure. You can follow blue protocol for lung evaluation and cardiac ultrasonography for heart evaluation. In blue protocol, you can identify pulmonary edema, which is indicated by increased presence of B lines. You can also recognize presence of pneumonia, pleural effusion, decompensated COPD, or asthma. Cardiac USG uses are almost similar to the echocardiography, but is done by an emergency physician rather than a echo technician or the cardiologist. Non-invasive impedance cardiography is a newer investigation which measures cardiac output non-invasively. Multi-detector CT angiography can distinguish ischemic form from other forms of cardiomyopathy. Tissue Doppler E by EA ratio is additive to BNP measures. And this picture here I am showing you the ultrasonography picture typical of pulmonary edema. So these white lines extending from center to the periphery are the B lines. If you are seeing more than 2 B lines in one single field or more than 10 B lines for one lung field, that is indicative of pulmonary edema. So how are you going to manage? Now you have examined the patient, you have obtained the investigations, and you are at the verge of your diagnosis. Now how are you going to manage? There are phases in the management of acute pulmonary edema. Urgent phase, as soon as medical people have contacted the patient, on an immediate phase which spans for the initial 1 hour to 120 minutes. So in the urgent phase, you have two questions to ask: whether there is cardiogenic shock. If cardiogenic shock, the answer is yes, you need to go for circulatory support measures. It can be either pharmacologic or mechanical. If there is no cardiogenic shock, next question you need to ask is cardiac failure causing respiratory failure? Meaning, is there pulmonary edema? If respiratory failure, signs of respiratory failure are present, you need to ventilatory support has to be given. Start with oxygen with nasal pharynx of the face mask. Then you have options like NIV, either CPAP or BiPAP, and finally you can go for mechanical ventilation stepwise. The immediate phase includes identification of acute etiology. You can remember this acute etiology by the mnemonic CHOMP, which stands for coronary artery disease syndrome, hypertensive emergency, arrhythmia, mechanical complications, and pulmonary embolism. Diagnostic workup to confirm acute heart failure, clinical evaluation to select optimal management, and immediate initiation of specific management go hand in hand. Once you have found cardiogenic shock and you have started circulatory support, immediate stabilization, and you need to transfer the patient to ICU or CCU. So what are the options available for management of acute heart failure in the emergency department? Acute heart failure is confirmed. Bedside assessment to identify hemodynamic profiles. Look for presence of congestion. If congestion is present, you call it as warm and wet type of. Look for presence or absence of congestion, then adequate peripheral perfusion. If there is presence of congestion with adequate peripheral perfusion, you call it as warm and wet type of patient. Again, it can be two types: vascular type of fluid distribution or cardiac type of fluid distribution. Vascular type of fluid distribution is most commonly hypertensive heart failure. Your options include vasodilators and diuretics. In cardiac type of fluid distribution, wherein it is congestion predominant, meaning there is pulmonary edema. Your options again include vasodilators, diuretics. If they are not effective, you can go for ultrafiltration. If there is congestion but there is no adequate peripheral perfusion, you call that as wet and cold patient. Because of congestion, you are calling it wet, and patient is not having peripheral perfusion, so you call it as wet and cold patient. Then you look for SBP. SBP less than 90 mmHg. S. Your options are inotropic agents, vasopressors, and mechanical circulatory support. If SBP is more than 90 mmHg, your options again vasodilators and inotropes. There is no congestion and there is adequate peripheral perfusion. You call it as dry and warm, adequately perfused. Adjust to oral therapy, and no need to initiate IV therapy. A patient, there is no congestion, there is no adequate peripheral perfusion. You call that patient as dry and cold patient, hypoperfused and hypovolemic. You give a fluid challenge, inotropic support, and manage just like in cardiogenic shock. So what are the initial goals of management? The most important goal is expeditiously establish the diagnosis of acute heart failure. There should not be any doubt of acute heart failure. You should have ruled out other diseases that can cause acute heart failure, which can be treated, like acute myocardial infarction, massive pulmonary embolism. If you find out any life-threatening causes like problems with the airway, problems with electrolytes, problems with kidney, you need to attend to those problems. You need to initiate therapies to rapidly provide symptom relief. If you have diagnosed acute heart failure, your most common thing is you need to rapidly relieve the symptoms, and you need to reduce the pulmonary edema, restore adequate circulation, identify the etiology of precipitating triggers. So initial stabilization, as I already told in the flow chart, it includes supplemental oxygen to maintain saturation greater than 92%. It can be done either with a nasal cannula or a face mask. Capnometry and blood gas measurements can help titrate the therapy. Non-invasive ventilation combined with standard medical therapy reduces need for intubation. So always try NIV before you decide to intubate the patient. But when the patient is not tolerating NIV, the patient is GCS is too low to initiate an NIV, you can go with mechanical ventilation. There is one more modality of oxygenation, high velocity nasal insufflation, which is superior to standard oxygen therapy, but it has not been shown superior to non-invasive ventilation. So now we'll go into specific syndromes. The first one is hypertensive heart failure. As you know, for hypertensive heart failure, your options include vasodilators and the diuretics. Vasodilators most commonly used are the nitrates. Out of them, most common drug is the nitroglycerin. It is a short-acting, rapid onset, systemic venous and arterial dilator. It decreases mean arterial pressure by reducing preload through vasodilation, especially venodilation. Can have arterial dilatory effects at higher doses. Nitroglycerin may have coronary vasodilatory effects, and it might reduce myocardial ischemia and improve cardiac functioning. The starting dose of nitroglycerin is 0.4 milligrams sublingual. You can opt for intravenous therapy with a dose of 0.5 to 0.7 micrograms per kg per minute. It can be titrated every few minutes to a maximum of 200 micrograms per minute based on blood pressure measurements and patient tolerance. Most common complication, hypotension, which is easily reversible, and drug cessation with IV route. The next nitrate available for use, nitroprusside. Used if maximal doses of nitroglycerin fail to reduce blood pressure. This is potent arterial vasodilator. Its hemodynamic effects include decreased blood pressure, left ventricular filling pressure reduction, and increased cardiac output. Initial dose of nitroprusside is 0.3 micrograms per kg per minute. It can be titrated upwards every 5 to 10 minutes to maximum dose of 10 micrograms per kg per minute. Major complications include hypotension and thiocyanate toxicity. So the next option you have for hypertensive heart failure is the loop diuretics. Diuretics are used to remove excess fluid after vasodilation. Loop diuretics given without vasodilation can lead to increased mortality and renal dysfunction because there is severe vasoconstriction in acute heart failure to maintain BP because of sympathetic overactivity. So if you are giving diuretics without vasodilation, you are removing more fluid from the intracellular space, and there is reduced blood supply to the vital organs like kidney, brain. So it causes more damage. So your aim is to first vasodilate and then reduce the fluid. So the dosing schedule, if the patient has no prior use of furosemide, 20 to 40 milligrams intravenously can be given. If patient is already on furosemide, a total daily IV dose of 1 to 2.5 times the patient's previous total dose divided in half and given as IV bolus every 12 hours is the norm. Continuous infusion has advantages as it produces lesser hypotension and electrolyte abnormalities. Complications include hypomagnesemia, hypokalemia, hyperuricemia, and hypovolemia. So the next entity is heart failure with normal blood pressure. Here, because there is not much of sympathetic overaction, there is normal blood pressure. There is no vasoconstriction. So the first choice of drugs include loop diuretics, which provide symptomatic relief. They also accentuate the effect of ACE inhibitors, which you are going to start later in the course of therapy. Alternatives to furosemide here are bumetanide, 1 mg equivalent to 40 mg of furosemide, or torsemide, which is most commonly used, 20 mg is equivalent to 40 mg of furosemide. In the past, morphine has been used widely for acute heart failure, but morphine has good choice because of increased mortality and morbidity. ACE inhibitors or beta blockers are not initiated in ED therapy because they have a lot of side effects and hypotension. What do you do when there is heart failure with evidence of hyperperfusion or cardiogenic shock? You can carefully consider fluid boluses, crystalloids, 250 ml liquids of NS. Consider intraarterial catheter to monitor actual blood pressure because you cannot measure peripheral blood pressure accurately. Here your choice is inotropic therapy. You need to improve BP, improve cardiac functioning. Titrate to lowest adequate BP. Norepinephrine initial dose of 8 to 12 micrograms per minute is the most preferred agent and can be called as drug of choice. Dopamine. The initial dose of dopamine is 0.5 to 2 micrograms per kg per minute. Epinephrine at an initial dose of 1 to 4 micrograms per minute is replacing norepinephrine and almost equal in efficacy to norepinephrine. Dobutamine initial 0.5 to 1 microgram per kg per minute. The advantage of norepinephrine here is you can give norepinephrine without a central line to start with. Start norepinephrine through a peripheral line, then convert to a central line. But dopamine and epinephrine should always be started through a central line. If you don't have central line access, then choose norepinephrine over dopamine or epinephrine. Dobutamine you can give completely through peripheral line. There is no need to get a peripheral line, central line. But the problem with dobutamine is it causes hypotension. So if the patient is having an SBP of less than 90 millimeters of mercury, you cannot start dobutamine as the sole agent. Other therapeutic considerations include dialysis if there is severe renal failure, blood transfusion if severe anemia exists, hemoglobin less than 8 gram percent, rapid coronary vascularization if acute myocardial infarction is evident, rate rhythm control if there is an aberrant rhythm or arrhythmia. So disposition decisions. You found a patient with acute heart failure, provide a risk discrimination and patient controlled self-care evaluation. If patient is able to follow self-care at home and you have evaluated and confirmed that there is proper support from the family members or the caregivers, you can discharge the patient once the IV drugs are tapered. So what makes you decide whether the patient needs to be admitted to the hospital or patient can be discharged after cessation of IV drugs? There are certain risk stratification strategies, mainly two types: in-hospital mortality predictors and predictors of post-discharge events. Most useful predictors: elevated blood urea nitrogen, lowered SBP, and higher serum creatinine at admission has high in-hospital mortality rate. These patients should be admitted to a cardiac care unit. Age, respiratory rate, BP, blood urea nitrogen, sodium, presence of cerebrovascular disease or dementia, presence of COPD, cirrhosis, cancer, or lower hemoglobin are the predictors for post discharge events, and you have to take care of all these issues. Keep your head up, keep your heart strong. Thank you.